Everyone knows the Seiko Sarb. I even have one myself that's been on the channel. When people say Sarb, they generally mean either the 033 or 35. But, of course, there are other iconic watches from the Sarb line. The 017 Alpinist and the 065, which birthed the Cocktail Time collection. Well, there are a lot of numbers in between those, and so, many other Sarbs too. We've got one here to look at today, which I think deserves the iconic status just as much as some of the others. Welcome to Addicted to Watches. Today, we'll be looking at a watch, and also looking at the bright side in a less than ideal situation. I bought this watch second-hand online, without being able to see it, and thought I was getting a good deal. But maybe it was a bit too good to be true. We'll hear about the watch, but also about my experience with this lesser-known cousin of an icon. This is the Seiko SARB021. Straight away, we can see some similarities and some distinct differences between this and the 03533 Sarbs. It's got a very similar dial and that iconic font for automatic below the pinion. But that case has a much sportier feel compared to the dressier Sarbs. The case almost reminds me of a samurai with those sharp angles and flat surfaces. If I'm being honest, I might even prefer this case over the Sarb 033. Many hail that as the perfect everyday watch, but I'd probably argue that this one fits into that category as well. Since we're already talking about the case, let's start there as we get into the nitty-gritty of the watch. It's got a very wearable case, just like the 033/35. The diameter can be tricky to measure with those crown guards, but from the 2 o'clock to 8 across the case, we've got a measurement of 38.5mm. Those crown guards give that size a bit more visual weight, so in reality it feels more like a 39 to 39.5mm size. Thickness is quite good as well, at just 11.5mm, and lug to lug comes in at 45. So, it's not likely that this one will be hanging over the sides of your wrist. Lug width is what you'd expect at 20mm. Overall, I think that's a good set of numbers to suit a wide variety of wrists, from below average to above average, and for most people, this watch will wear perfectly. Looking at the finishing, we've got a polished bezel, which is par for the course on an everyday watch like this. As I mentioned earlier, the case is made up of a few different angles, and we can see the top of the lugs point downwards pretty sharply thanks to one of those. This surface is brushed, as is the side of the case. They are broken up, however, by pretty sizable polished chamfers that don't go all the way to the ends of the lugs, but rather stop where the angle of the lugs change. It's another angle that adds just a bit more complexity to the case, and I really like it. The balance of brushed and polished on this watch works really well to highlight some parts of the watch when it catches the light and emphasizes that angular design. The crown at 3 is guarded, again reinforcing the sportiness of the watch, and, while it doesn't screw down, it is signed with the Seiko S, and still provides more than adequate 100 meters of water resistance. Again, this watch comes from a time when you could get a signed crown like this on a reasonably priced watch from Seiko. You also got a 6R15 movement for your money, that we can see ticking away here through the display caseback. While it is not up to the levels of Swiss movements, it is still a definite step up from the NH35s and 6s. It hacks, hand winds, and beats at that same 6 Hz, but Seiko at least put a little bit more effort here with some decoration on the rotor. Around the caseback here, we can see some details about the watch, including the water resistance, and one thing that is nice to see here are the words Made in Japan. Okay, back to the front of the watch, and let's take a look at the dial. It bears some similarities to the Sarb 03335, but there are also some differences. The most obvious one is the design of the hour markers. They are much broader, and as a result more legible. They are split down the middle and look a bit like Kit Kats. A mix of polishing and horizontal texturing help those to really catch and play with the light. Around these is a printed minute track with seconds and fifths of a second marked. One detail here I really like is that minute markers on each hour extend all the way to the edge of the dial. In doing so, they anchor the dial and provide a literal connection between it and the rest of the watch. At 3, we have a date complication with a color matched date wheel for additional everyday functionality. Since the hour markers are polished, I don't mind a black date wheel here, and overall, the dial still feels relatively balanced. It's surrounded by an applied frame with a bevel for an extra bit of depth. Like the date frame, the Seiko logo is applied above the pinion, and below, printed in white, is automatic and 23 joules. Overall, it's a pretty simple, straightforward dial, and the squarer indices are a good match for the angular design of the case. The hands are also quite interesting on this watch. They aren't lumed, but have a bevel running down the middle. However, between those two surfaces is a thin line in a frosted finish. This not only assists with legibility in different lighting, but also mimics the lines at each hour along the minute track. The shape of the hour and minute hands are not one I've seen used on other watches before, but again, those truncated ends to the hands seem to match well with the different angles around the case. They are quite broad and make it very easy to read the time. Did you pick up on it just then? No lume on the hands. And not only that, there's no lume on the dial at all either. It's a bit disappointing, since the rest of the watch is clearly going for a sporty vibe. I can't really see any reason for Seiko not to have included any. Maybe they didn't want to interrupt those Kit Kat indices. But they could still have put small dots around the outer edge. You won't be able to read the time easily after dark, but at least those hands and indices catch small amounts of light to help you read the time anyway. Now, this watch originally came on a bracelet, and when I bought it, it did too, but we'll come back to that. At the moment, it's on this silicone strap that has a texture on top to make it look like leather, as well as some white accent stitching. So, let's get it on wrist and see how it wears. As I said, I feel like it fits my wrist perfectly, not too big or too small. As I turn my wrist, you can see how those indices catch the light and reflect it in a really pleasing way. For an everyday watch, I don't think I'd change any of the dimensions of this watch, and all the different angles on the case keep it interesting as it moves. So, what about the bracelet, I hear you say? Well, I have the bracelet, but it's not much use to me. You see, in this hobby, compared to many others especially, you win some and you lose some. There are many things that can go wrong. You might not like the watch in person when you get it, it might not fit, it might have mechanical issues. You might find something else right afterwards that you like better. In this case, the bracelet came apart on me because a pin had worn down over time inside. Understandable, and depending on where in the bracelet it happens, it could be a simple fix. But this one happened on a link very close to the case. There is a silver lining here. In my search to have it repaired, I learned how they were made. For multi-piece links like this one, I thought that the two outer links were pushed from each side over the pin, but apparently the pin is inserted through one side, and then the opening where it was inserted from is laser welded over and polished smooth. So, even though I don't have a useful bracelet anymore, I did learn something new. I'm not sure if that's a complaint about the watch or just bad luck, but either way, it hasn't really affected my enjoyment of the watch. It is a bit of lume away from being pretty much a perfect option as an everyday watch that really could suit any occasion. It might be less common these days compared to the 033 or 35, but this SARB021 lives up to the reputation and hype that the Sarb line as a whole has garnered for itself over time. If you can find one in good used condition, grab it. And if you have a spare bracelet for one, hit me up. What do you think about this watch? Had you come across this one before? Would you choose this over a 033 or 35? Are there any other hidden gem Sarbs that more people should know about? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.